Welcome to the Yale University Art Gallery. I'm Margaret Ewing, the Horace W. Goldsmith Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art. And thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's conversation with Jes Fan in celebration of the opening of the exhibition Jes Fan, Unbounded. This exhibition is the result of 2 years of close collaboration with Jes and with numerous colleagues at the gallery. I'd particularly like to thank the Departments of Exhibitions and Conservation who have truly made this exhibition possible, as well as my colleagues in the Department of Education who have supported the development of today's program. This event is made possible by the Martin A. Ryerson Lectureship Fund and the Happy and Bob Doran Artist in Residence Fund. The work of an artist is to help us to see something in a new way. In the case of Jes Fan's work, we're asked to reconsider everything we thought we knew about how the world is organized and understood. Posing a challenge to binary systems of categorization, Jes proposes a new mode of understanding, one in which systems are broken open, allowing us to see that things are more complex, disordered, and variable than we may have come to believe. The subjects of Jes Fan's work are wide-ranging and in the last 10 years have included the beliefs about identity that are mapped onto shapes and substances, the mutability of human bodies, queer embodiment, human and interspecies kinship, and the regenerative survival strategies of certain animals and plants native to Hong Kong. A spirit of exploration and investigation is inherent in this work, and one of the things I find so compelling about Jes's practice is the way in which they often work without knowing what the answer will be. The work unfolds in the making. In this time, when systems of categorization are being used to divide and to harm, the stakes of Jes Fan's practice are especially timely. I hope that the exhibition, which will be on view through June, will create many opportunities for conversations and reflections. It's a special treat to have Jes with us here today and to be joined by Rachel Lee, both of whom it's my pleasure to now introduce. Jes Fan lives and works in Brooklyn and Hong Kong. Since graduating from the Rhode Island School of Design program in Glass in 2014, Jes has gained widespread recognition and been included in numerous international group exhibitions, including Histories of Ecology at MASPI in Sao Paulo last year, Ciencias Sexuales at the Institute of Contemporary Art Los Angeles in 2024, the M+SIG Prize finalist exhibition in Hong Kong in 2022, and major biennials and triennials, including the 2024 Whitney Biennial, the 2024 Toronto Triennial, the 2022 Venice Biennale, the 2021 New Museum Triennial, and the 2020 Sydney Biennial. Rachel C. Lee is Professor of Gender Studies, English, and the Institute of Society and Genetics at UCLA. Her writings on the art practices of Jes Fan and Annika Yi have appeared in the academic journals Catalyst, Feminism, Theory, Technoscience, and Food, Culture, and Society. Lee is the author of the award-winning book, The Exquisite Corpse of Asian America, Biopolitics, Biosociality, and Posthuman Ecologies, which was published by NYU Press, which examines how advances in biotechnology have affected racial formation and notions of belonging. She's co-led a Mellon-funded seminar in teaching excellence on the topic of medical humanities and is a former director of the UCLA Center for the Study of Women, Barbra Streisand Center. Our conversation will go until 6:30 with some time reserved at the end for questions. And afterwards, we invite you to join us for a reception with DJ Kylie Hamamoto in the lobby and a visit to the exhibition, which will stay open until 8 o'clock. So now please join me in welcoming Jes Fan and Rachel Lee.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for inviting me to join in this conversation with Jes. Jes, thank you for your amazing corpus of work, which everyone will have the opportunity, if they haven't already, to see after the show. I have this image up of one of your earlier works that's not in the show, but I wondered if we could open up our discussion today by telling us about this seemingly minimalist piece and its compositional elements.
Before I answer that question, I want to just say thank you and extend my gratitude to the installation team who helped me through making a completely new work for this exhibition in the course of the past 2 weeks. I also want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Ann Gunnison and Kiki Peters and Daryl Smith, the scientific glassblower at Yale Chemistry Department, who had helped me with this tremendous task of repairing a sculpture that I never thought I would be able to repair. So I will answer your question.
That's fine.
I just want to say thank you. I think it's really important to register people who have put their effort in helping me realize my work. And I also want to say thank you, especially to Margaret for putting the show together and trusting me and the process, in the process of it. And also, thank you, Anna, thank you, Kevin, thank you, Tom, and Grant, especially for pulling this through this past week. So, I'm sure I've forgot some names, but I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I will move on to talk about this work that I did when I was doing a residency at Recess Art at the time, and I started becoming, this language, I couldn't really understood why I have this visual language at the time. I think for a lot of artists, their visual language emerged from a place of the unknown. And somehow, as it repeats throughout the work, or as you said, the corpus of the work, the reason behind it comes out. It reveals itself in the process. And this was kind of the earlier work that I did using this visual language of the scaffolding, as you call it, or lattice forms. It was an impulse, but it came from a place that now I understand why it embodied that language. It's very much mimicking not just medical diagrams of nervous systems, of networks, of how the body functions biologically, but it also goes back to deeper roots of the form of the Chinese character, the form of root networks I was looking at, the form of a lot of the tubular networks that exist in the city that I grew up in, and the way that flora and fauna interact with the harsh reality of that city. So that's how the scaffolding came, yeah.
Oh, I see, that's amazing. And then the scaffolding is deliberately kind of a flesh color.
Yeah, well, I wanted it not just to be so much like flesh color, but the kind of generic prosthetic color at the time, yeah. Like I want to be mindful, like there's many colors to flesh, right?
Right,
and, yeah.
Exactly. And do you want to talk about the other components, the use of melanin, testosterone, estrogen in particular?
Yeah, so I was doing a residency at the time at Recess Art, and I became really interested in what E. coli can do. E. coli is a bacteria, and I found out through a collaboration with a biolab in Brooklyn that you can grow melanin out of E. coli. And the process was very similar to tanning. We expose it under UV rays, and it's
melanin?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I became extremely interested in that tangent of working, because before that I was working with my mom's urine and extracting estrogen from it. Then I became really interested in how the source of the meaning of the material actually impacts the reading of the material. So then I was playing with E. coli and...
You mean a genetically modified E. coli to express melanin?
Yes.
And not the estrogen, though? Just the melanin?
No. Well, it's interesting because my mother is postmenopausal, so she takes pharmaceutical estrogen, right? But then, the estrogen I extract from her is actually sourced from...
E. coli.
Well, not E. coli. could be, actually. That's a good one, yeah.
We should find out.
We should find out.
I think, Margaret, you had some questions.
Well, I want to ask you too about the glass in this piece. So these materials are injected into the glass. Glass is, of course, where your practice started at RISD, and it continues to be one of the most important materials in your work, and it's part of the works upstairs that you've just made in the last, in the last couple of weeks, one of them. Glass is important both formally, of course, in your work, but also conceptually. And I'm wondering how your relationship to glass has changed over these last 10 years and how you're thinking about it now.
Yeah, it was fateful, I guess, as I decided to go to RISD. I had no idea that glass as an artistic medium even existed until I stumbled upon the fourth floor of the Metcalfe building, and I came from Hong Kong, like a city that no one even heard of glass blowing. I was born in Canada, but I grew up most of my formative years in Hong Kong, and seeing the process of it, like this completely untamable substance on this very narrow piece of metal piping, and having to work with something that's liquid and something you cannot touch, and touch is such an important aspect in my work. And having that restriction forces me to engage with that material in a way that, like, how can I introduce the kind of haptic quality in it without being able to touch it? So it continues on in my medium, and in these particular images, the glass functions much so as a holder. So these objects are kind of like hard-boiled eggs, where the shell of them is clear glass, but the inside is actually a type of silicone that they use to encapsulate solar panels. So they break a lot. They rupture, and especially if they go on international flights, the air pressure changes the material in the inside, the silicone, and then the glass is restrictive, so they just expand and crack, and that is unfortunately the life of the object. Yeah.
It was part of the excitement of this exhibition, was unpacking works, and this was not this piece, but I'm thinking of a similar piece that's in the exhibition, Form Begets Function, that was most recently in Los Angeles, and it shipped back, and we sort of opened up the crate, and you said, we better check the condition sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And therefore, I really have to extend my gratitude to also Amy Dow, the registrar. I forgot to mention her name, who's been a champion throughout this exhibition. Yeah. It's definitely a challenge working with glass, yeah.
Well, I'm sure people will maybe have follow-up questions about like what survives and how you pivot.
But I guess I want to add that when something breaks, I don't think of it as failure, or I don't think of it something as loss, right? Like, if it breaks, that's just its lifespan, you know, and it's just a process. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I've grouped these pieces together partly because they all speak to me of something cutaneous going on, which is to say, emphasizing the way in which our bodies don't end at the skin. And I wanted you to speak a little bit about, I guess, texture with regard to these pieces, especially when we think about the relationship of the material of the base, so silicone in what might be thought of as a flesh tone. I'm just going to also go ahead a little bit. There's this other piece called Testo Candle, and then just go back a little bit, Testo Soap, and then Mother's a Woman Cream. So the relationship of those pieces with the base and then the receptacles of glass that are prescription receptacles. So can you talk a little bit about I know you're very careful in assembling everything, right? The relationship of the materials to each other and what that kind of says about the piece.
At the time I was making a lot of silicone work, I made barbells out of silicone, and they were all differently hued. And I was really interested in understanding prosthesis. And I guess you and I have this common just desire of understanding things in the world by way of etymology.
Right.
So prosthesis, I was looking at that word a lot, and one of its early root of the word is in place. And so I thought it was really critically important to carve out place for these objects that are addressing the idea of prosthesis or the prosthesis of gender, and having a home for them. So they each have like allotted little circles for them to sit perfectly.
Oh, so underneath what we can't see is a
Yeah,
little...
they kind of pucker on the edge, and there's a sculpture up there in the main gallery in which the pedestal that it sits on puckers and sinks inside. So it's the same instinct of homing something.
Right, nesting, homing.
Yeah.
That's great.
And speaking of silicone, which was a big part of all of our lives the last 3 weeks during this installation.
Yes.
So sort of the biggest surprise in doing this installation, I guess, is that we'd planned to do a new iteration of dermal application, which is here, which was 2018 originally, I think.
Yeah.
And which is pigmented silicone on the walls of the gallery. And so you were going to do a new version of that, and then arrived in the space and decided that it was going to be something else, and which became this really fantastic new piece called Wet Pith, which is very much site-specific, and I think people would be sort of interested to hear about, you know, how this was for you, this sort of decision that it was going to be something else, and then the process of doing that over this last 3 weeks.
Yeah. So one of the driving desires in my sculptural practice is turning something inside out, like kind of almost like flipping an orange rind inside out, or a lemon rind inside out. And for dermal application, it was specific to the gallery space in which I was working with, that you have to enter this really dark, cavernous space in an industrial building, and then you come upon a room with a very low ceiling in which you already feel like you're encroached within the body of an animal, because before that, before this room, the floor was all lined with fur. So the feeling was very much like the skin, entering the room of the skin, then you enter the room of the interior, but flipped inside out. And upon arriving at the gallery space 2 weeks ago at Yale, it clicked in me that that feeling wouldn't translate so well in this space, within the confines of the systems, of the wall systems here. It just didn't read as well. So I started, we were in conversation a lot on how to tackle that space, how to make it still feel like you're entering an interior space, but without the prescription also of these flesh tones that are inhibiting the feeling of you're entering an interior when the confines of the architecture implicate such. So I'm really interested in just, actually maybe I shouldn't talk about the piece because people are gonna experience it, and I don't want to color their experience. So I'm just gonna pause at that, and then you guys can ask me about it later. Yeah.
But just to get you to elaborate a little bit more on something you said, which was so wonderful, which is you actually do a lot of thinking about your titles, right? And so I have here function begets form, and you talk about it being paired with form begets function, which is on display. I don't know if you want to talk about that title in particular, because I was thinking of it as a modernist trope in architecture. And then also, if you want to say a little bit more about wet pith, when you said things inside out, like a lemon, if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Maybe I'll start with wet pith first,
Yes.
because I just talked about that. So I return to the citrus as a metaphor in my work a lot, because I think it's a very common and very private experience of someone seeing a lemon across their room and feeling the sourness in your jaw. I keep returning to that metaphor, and it's almost a Pavlovian response, but by seeing something visually, you get to access this like very corporeal reflex that no other substance does. Sometimes for me, sour plum does that, but preserved sour plums.
Yeah.
And that kind of feeling, like, and pith is, the white skin, the subcutaneous white skin of citruses. And thinking, it also means core. So I think the new installation really addresses my relationship with glass, why I keep returning to it as a material. There's something that glass is capable of describing, a membrane that's almost akin to running your tongue across the inner lining of your teeth that no other materials do. There's something about it. So I'm really excited to hear other people's response about this new installation.
Yeah. So definitely, I don't want to, I feel like now I can't give anything away about it, but it is really.
Don't build it up so much.
Okay,
You just gotta set expectation low. Yeah, it actually doesn't exist.
But to say that that you have changed the pigmentation, I can say that, yes?
Yes, yeah.
Right, and then this idea of like a haptic relationship is also in there as well. So I guess I won't say anything more. I feel like it's going to be, everyone's going to go up and be like, what were they talking about?
It's actually super disappointing, yeah.
No. But that notion of a membrane is definitely visible.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Okay. Well, that might be a good segue to some of these pieces, because speaking about the visual in relationship to the haptic, but also this idea of how our bodies store something like a mouth feel, something like a sourness feel, is a kind of interior sensation that is difficult sometimes to convey in like a visual media. And here, what you're doing with medical imaging, I'm sort of prompting you to speak about your encounter with CT scanning, and then printing out those images, manipulating them, but producing a set of works that are about maybe making visible the interiors or maybe not. And I have here a quote on the old Irish, etymology of the word queer, as in quare, used to describe crooked, bent, hollow, curved, or bowed things. And of course, your work displays so well that our features inside are all of these things. They're very, very queer. And so I'm just wondering if you want to speak a little bit more about how you got into this encounter with CT scanning as a way of thinking about your art practice.
Yeah, so a recurring motif in the tubular network is a reference to root networks. Like we talk about stolon, like grassroots, also rhizomes. But the feeling, I think the root, like rooting, trying to find the deepest down, like the etymology, root, like I think I'm driven by a force, this stubbornness, to find the root of everything. And somehow the interior, I thought, if I can access the interior of my body, I can find the root of something. I can find that root of itself. And that's how these pieces happen. In working with Argo wood as an inspiration point, as the matter I was trying to study and work with, I really wanted to understand how this species of tree is capable of, in their sites of wounding, is capable of regenerating a type of oil that turn it into a very precious incense that's only exclusively used for temples. Or I was interested in that transformation, like this internal secretion as the source of a transformation. So that's how I started thinking, how can I access the interior of myself? I usually make body casts from my immediate circle of friends. I'm like, I cannot cast my interior. And so the only way to access is really through medical imaging.
I see. So, so did the agar wood part come up first then? I don't know if you want to.
The Pearl series came up first, yeah.
Right, so the pieces on the left and the center here are these ones, the surfaces are referring, or maybe is it all three? That refer to the
Just
surface
the
of the,
left
it's
two,
right,
yeah.
the left two images refer to the bark, or is it of the agarwood tree?
Yeah, I mean, formally too, it references tree roots. I enlarged the CT scans and 3D printed them to be almost the size of a tree trunk. So,
Right, so can you describe a little bit more the agarwood, like what is agarwood, and how did you come to be interested in it, and just in a little more detail? I mean, it's such a fascinating story behind these works. Like, what is that, and what drew you?
To understand that, I guess it's derived from this body of work called Sites of Wounding, where I looked into species that are native to Hong Kong and is also related to the naming of Hong Kong and are capable of regenerate some sort of transformation through the process of trauma. So agarwood being one of the species that is, of tree species that is capable of secreting a resin that coagulates upon some sort of fungal infection or some sort of attack. And its scar tissue is harvested for incense. And the other species I worked with is Akoya pearls, which in the show you'll see a video of me working for the span of end of 2020 to 2023, trying to cultivate my own freshwater pearls, but using the characters of Pearl of the Orient as the nucleus of the image pearl. And the body of sculptures that come out from that series all reference the kind of color or the kind of formal aspects of the organisms I was working with.
That's really interesting, because I didn't realize that the oyster work came before the agarwood work, but both are tied to Hong Kong, and both are tied to this idea of a foreign body, right? Or some sort of wound generating this precious thing that is then, well, actually commodified highly, agarwood, like incense, and also it's medicinal, apparently, as well. And it is the immune substance that the tree produces. So all of that wrapped up together. That's really fascinating.
Just ask you too, Jess. So you live mostly in New York, but you still spend a lot of time in Hong Kong, and your family is there. And some of your projects are so specific to Hong Kong. And I'm wondering, do you conceive of those works when you're there? Do you conceive of them when you're in Brooklyn, or both, or
I guess, like, home is not geographical. Like, it's always inside of you, so I can't tell you. It's not isolated to geography.
Many points of inspiration. So these are what we have called your fungal and mollusk collaborations. And you've already referenced the one on the right, which is networks. So in that one slide, the more horizontal piece is networks for rupture, and the more vertical piece is networks for expansion. And you mentioned that, well, did you actually fully mention how it ruptured? And I know you said something about thanking the people who helped you here, but do you want to speak a little bit more? And I know Margaret was going to ask you about this as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these pieces were the first pieces I saw of yours in the new museum in 2021, and sort of what I have been going back to, just my immediate response to them over the course of putting this exhibition together, like sort of the beginning of my thinking about your work, with its combination of like just beautiful, exquisite form, and then something else sort of running through it, and in this case, what's running through it is Phycomyces zygospore, this mold. When we started planning this exhibition, I was like, we have to have these in the show, and you said, oh, we can't, they're broken. They're broken, they're impossible to show.
Yeah.
And as you said earlier, thanks to the really incredible collaboration from our Department of Conservation and Daryl Smith in the chemistry department here at Yale, they've been repaired and they're here. And even as recently as last week, we weren't sure if it was going to happen because there was a crack that developed and the liquid wasn't holding. So you've talked about these as very important works for you,
Right.
And that it's very meaningful that they're here. There's a lot to say about them, but I mean one point that really interests me that we also touched on earlier is this fragility, and there's always this possibility of breakage, of loss. But yeah, how is it to see them here installed in the museum, and what are you thinking about them now that you see them again intact?
I am so thankful to see them repaired, and I don't think I could have done it without Yale's support in helping me fix these two pieces. And it's funny because I guess when you reference fragility, you also use the word loss and breakage with loss. And since you've worked with me intimately, that's not how I think about it. I think when I named it for rupture, I see every rupture as just a possibility for a new opening. And hopefully, it could be interpreted that way as well throughout just experiencing the piece without any caution signs. But I also want to add is when you asked me this question earlier, what does fragility mean in my practice? I'm not sure. I am very drawn to things, even with form begets functions work or the earlier system pieces, they're just barely hung on these really thin lattice tubing, and they're not adhered to it. They're just sitting, almost waiting to slip away. And they explode. And I think that I don't know why I'm attracted to it, but I am constantly reminded by my partner who's Taiwanese, that the word boli, which means glass in Mandarin, is also a slang used to describe queerness, as something that's fragile, as something that is transparent but also fragile. So maybe, I'm not sure if it's related. I need to talk to my therapist about that. But I don't know. Something's coming from there.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually just wanted to ask you more about why you chose Phycomyces zygospore, these are kind of better pictures of it. And one thing to notice about the piece upstairs is it's a time-based piece, right? So it's newly inoculated with the Phycomyces, and so they haven't yet grown as much as they will over time. So come see the exhibit more than once to see how it changes over time. But why Phycomyces zygospora in particular?
Yeah, I think maybe this is the first chapter or attempt to work with organism that is anthropomorphic, similar to the agar wood in the body and the pearl in the body. And it just reminds me so much of Asian hair, or hair I grew up with. And just upon seeing it, I was like, how can a poop mold look like this?
Exactly.
There's something about this childish wonder, sense of fascination with something that is inherently so anthropomorphic.
Yeah, so here's another picture that looks, I guess, more hair-like. And I guess what I was wondering, though, was it deliberately that you chose something that is known as a poop mold to make it? No, that wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Phycomyces, so I do stuff on mold. So Phycomyces also turns toward the light. And you have that lateral piece networks. And so I think I asked you this before, this idea of reorienting, a species of fungi that wants to just go vertical to do this other thing is in the work. It's embedded in the work. I don't know. I just think that's amazing. So all these layered meanings, which brings us to palimpsest. The idea, these layers that you work in your art is in the title. It's also in the fine process of sanding that goes into many of the pieces. This is just a still from the film, but many of the pieces that are in the kind of oyster-ish, shell-ish hues kind of bring this up, this idea of these layers. Here, I think I wanted to ask you about well, I think you were going to ask about collaboration, or do you want me to?
Either of us could.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So do you want to speak a little bit about your time making this piece and training with or being beside a oyster farmer?
Yeah. So I was working in collaboration with a gallery in Hong Kong called Empty Gallery, and also with one of their really amazing, who's now a conservator, artist herself, Iris Poon, who helped me in negotiating with the farmers, like, because it was happening during COVID. The piece is published in 2023, but it was actually made over the course of a very long collaborative process of learning how to grow my own pearls. And so the kind of collaboration, it's funny because it's not just through this remote, like, way of trying to grow my own pearls with also a professor in Hong Kong University. Like, I don't know how to do any of these. And I think one of the advantages of being an artist is that you're pressed by curiosity, and that curiosity leads you, almost like the nodes of phycomyces. It leads you to connect to other sources.
That's great.
In a way, yeah.
And do you want to say anything about the image on the left?
So that's where we tested so many ways of trying to anchor the nucleus of these characters into the shell of the pearl oyster, and the only way we found out that how to actually do it is by using like a sticker and just adhere it, like temporarily euthanize my collaborator, the oyster, and, and slipping this sticker on its shell after cleaning with rubbing alcohol, and then let it go back into water over and just wait. Yeah.
I see. That's amazing.
I suspect this has raised, our conversation has raised a lot of questions in the audience, and we would love to open it up. There is a microphone available, and yeah, back here.
Thank you so much, Jess. I can't wait to see the exhibition. I really liked what you said about the fact that when something breaks, it doesn't constitute a failure. And then I was struck, on the other hand, by the fact that you spoke about how grateful you were that certain works were repaired. And there may or may not be a tension there. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the value of repair is for you, and whether you ever consider showing works that are broken in order to make a statement about them and the objects having this ongoing life post-breakage, perhaps? Thank you.
So I think it matters from piece to piece. Some piece, especially for the network series, it's meant to hold liquid that can pose as a contaminant, but it's also critically important that that breakage doesn't contaminate other parts of the museum in the way that for the consideration of other shows. So it's important that if we were to really hold liquid to conceptually tie the piece together, it has to be repaired in order for it to exist, like show, in this particular context. But in other forms, if it continues the life of living inside a crate in the speculative economy of contemporary art, then if it breaks, I'm actually okay with that in some way, yeah.
Down in front here.
You. work is so bodily, empathetic, and so haptic. And especially in the first piece that you showed, I was just like drawn into wanting to explore it in a bodily, choreographed way, because it does have this sort of amazing choreography, I feel. And I was wondering if you ever thought of this stuff being occupiable by actual human beings, and because I think it would be so much fun to wander through it. And I don't know, maybe it's better that it's just the imagination that does that. It's true, that's possible, but I think, yeah, and then to be able to touch those glass pieces would be so central. You know?
Yeah. That could be possible. Yeah, maybe in the future.
I mean, I find that there's such a, I'm so aware of my physical relationship to the works when I'm near them. And having, I mean, this is the biggest collection of your work that I've ever seen, you know, in one place. And so moving through the exhibition, I'm just really struck that how strong that sense of connection is. So even if I'm not inside it, there is a relationship, I think a strong relationship.
But Jes, you also have, did I turn this off? You also have collaborated with other artists like dancers, and
Oh yeah, I've done that before.
Yeah, yes, you have done that.
Yeah. Forgot about that.
Yeah. See. So there has been.
Yeah.
But maybe, I mean, this is the interesting thing that was with silicone work, and when I think about your work on silicone, I definitely think about touching it. But maybe the glass work, which is so interesting because I too want to, but maybe it's just different because glass is.
I think it's the lemon, you know.
It's the lemon.
Yeah. The lemon is the goal. Yeah.
I really like what you said when talking about the mold, about the anthropomorphic capacities of the materials that you work with. And these seem like highly like scientific and like technical materials to handle. So I think one part of my question is just like, how do you discover these sort of materials to work with in the first place? Because they're like on a microscopic scale, like that's where you see the growth of like the Asian hair happening. And then I was also curious to hear you talk about, I think there's another kind of tension. You're thinking of like the likeness of the mold with the materiality of hair, but then I like thinking about the still from, of the putting the sticker onto the oyster after euthanizing. I'm curious to hear you talk about how you conceptualize that kind of engagement or interaction with the objects, quote unquote, that you work with, or these collaborators, if you feel like that's a kind of like contaminative collaboration of some kind.
I can't answer that. I don't know. Like, I really don't know where these ideas come from. And perhaps it comes from a place of I need to talk to my therapist about this. I don't know. I have no idea. Yeah. So.
I think I have a basic question, which is, I wonder if you could, Margaret and Jes, talk a little bit about your collaboration together to realize the exhibition, which was its own form of interaction. And I know we didn't really, get into the images of the show through this conversation, saving so much for a surprise later, but I would love for you to tell everyone about how you work together.
Yeah, I am not the easiest artist to work with because everything I work with is so drippy and slippery and fragile, and all the things that a traditional university art gallery is perhaps kind of not it's kind of against the grain of what normal exhibition requirements invite. So Margaret took on the immense challenge of working with me under this context, and I am really thankful for all the effort that Margaret has put in facilitating not just the repair of works that were damaged, but also in realizing the show, despite how difficult some of the work demands of the institution. I'll let you add on to that.
Well, that's focusing on, you know, the last couple of months, I'd say, and like the challenges of the installation, of which there were several. It's been such a pleasure working with you, Jes, over the last 2 years, 2+ years, I think. You know, it's my first show here at the Art Gallery. It's your first show in a museum. I think it's really been a sort of special relationship of us both kind of navigating this first together. And for me, learning about your work over the last 2 years has really been a process of unfolding and keeping going deeper and deeper through many conversations. I think the first time we met, you were in Hong Kong and we were on Zoom, and it was a 12-hour time difference, and you know, very generously did a studio visit at, you know, I don't know, 6 a.m. your time or something, and just these continuing conversations in New York, here, in Hong Kong. We spent some time together, which was really important, and for me to have the opportunity to learn about where you were coming from and sort of how your thinking has developed. And it was completely collaborative, you know, talking through the works that we would include and what made sense, how to talk about the works, what was the right language, and then yes, the last, you know, several weeks of installation and sort of working together through these challenges, some of which were anticipated and some of which weren't. So yeah, really, for me, a very special experience of collaboration. So thank you.
Thank you for your talk. I locked on to your comment about glass blowing and what you perceive as a lack of haptic contact. And then I was thinking, well, the ceramicist, somebody who's throwing a pot is definitely really into the haptic experience. Somebody painting has a tool between their hand and the canvas. And what is it about glass is it's insanely hot. And so it's dangerous. And so I've heard about fragility and repair. What aspect does thinking about danger enter into your work? Is there an appeal? Is it part of it?
I never formulated it as danger, but I guess threat and the possibility of rupture is, I guess, and contaminating. I guess those are like poising, almost like the formal language of my sculptures, like poising off of an edge, almost about to slip away. That's the feeling I'm trying to capture. And perhaps the subsequent kind of affect it inflects on the viewer is threat or danger, but I oftentimes don't perceive it as such, or intuitively I don't think of it as such. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe one last question. Or we can wrap it up and take it upstairs to the lobby for the reception. Please join us. And the gallery, the exhibition is open on the 4th floor. until 8 o'clock this evening. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Rachel and Jess.
Thank you.